Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. With the release of the ultimate electro mommy Kafka, we now need to learn everything we can about dot damage. In this video, we'll go over everything you need to know about damage over time, aka dots, in Honkai Star Rail. We'll go over the following: character dot damage, common ways to increase dot damage, character dot damage sources, break dot damage, and more. Timestamps will be down below. Now, what exactly is dot damage? Dot is short for damage over time. It's damage an enemy takes at the beginning of their turn. Dots show up as a debuff on the enemy. Another important thing to know is that contrary to what might seem logical, many enemies have bonus turns where they move multiple times in a row, and these bonus turns do not activate dot damage. Dots count as a debuff on the enemy, and thus last for a specific number of turns, generally lasting between 1 to 3 turns. There are visual indicators as well for dot damage. Non-dot damage shows up as normal damage numbers, and if they crit, well, it'll say crit. However, on the right, we can see that dot damage shows up with a little elemental icon next to it. Fortunately, Hoyoverse added this so we can distinguish what part of the damage is dot damage and what part is just normal damage. Next, there are two types of dot damage. The first is character kit dots, and the second are break dots. We'll go through each of these in excruciating detail, so buckle up and let's learn how dots work in Honkai Star Rail. Starting with character dots, the biggest and practically only difference between character dot damage and character non-dot damage is that dots cannot crit. This means that pretty much everything else applies to dot damage. So knowing this, what variables go into a dot damage calculation? We have the base damage, damage bonuses, the defense multiplier, the vulnerability multiplier, the resistance multiplier, and the toughness multiplier. I'll go through each of these and also talk about some common methods to increase each of these multipliers. Starting with the base damage. Base damage of a dot is simply the dot's multiplier times the stat that it scales off of. Take Kafka's ultimate dot, which at level 10 has a 290% attack scaling multiplier. This simply takes Kafka's attack stat and multiplies it with 2.9, which is the dot's multiplier. In order to increase this multiplier, simply provide more attack to Kafka via relics, level up her ultimate trace, or provide her with attack buffs like Tingyuan's skill or Asta's talent. Up next, we have the bonus damage multiplier. This is where elemental damage, all damage, and dot-specific damage boosts go. The most common sources for this multiplier are the elemental sphere, light cones, especially nihility ones, and various buffs from characters like Tingyuan's ultimate. Then we have the defense multiplier. The defense multiplier has the following variables in it: your character's level, the enemy's level, and defense shred/ignore. The best way to make this multiplier thicker, like Kafka is to level up your characters. Afterwards, the three most common sources are Silverwolf's ultimate to lower defense, Pella's ultimate to lower defense, and the 4-star light cone, the shiny sweating one. And let's keep going. We next have the vulnerability multiplier. This multiplier is basically a debuff on the enemy wherein the enemy takes more damage. Some common sources for increasing vulnerability are Silverwolf's signature light cone, Sampo's ultimate, which is specific for dot damage, and Luca's ultimate, which does increase vulnerability to everything, including dot damage. Up next, we have the resistance multiplier. Interestingly, this multiplier is much hard to come across in Honkai Star Rail right now in comparison to Genshin Impact. Both resistance penetration and resistance down on the enemy go into this multiplier. Anyway, I can only think of Silverwolf who can decrease the enemy's resistance to lightning damage. Let me know if I missed another source of resistance shred. And last but not least, we have the enemy's toughness. If the enemy isn't broken, the multiplier is 0.9, and if the enemy is broken, this multiplier goes up to 1.0. Now the next way to increase your dot damage output might seem a bit counterintuitive in a way, but it's to have the enemy move more often. The more often an enemy moves, the more turns they have to take dot damage. This means you want to avoid things that slow the enemy, and you also want to avoid status effects like entanglement or imprisonment, both of which delay the enemy's attack. However, freeze can be used to your advantage here. The turn that the enemy unfreezes, they will still take that dot damage. And when an enemy unfreezes, they actually advance their next turn forward by 50%. Now there are both pros and cons to this approach, as it means that all the debuffs will expire more quickly on the enemy, but at the same time they'll move much more frequently thanks to freeze and thus take more dot damage. Oh, and one last mechanic to note about dots is that it does not snapshot. The dot's damage is calculated based on the character stats as of when the dot occurs. Let's apply what we've learned about character dot multipliers. With my Eidolon Zero Kafka, first we're going to improve her light cone from the Fermata to Good Night Sleep Well. This increases the bonus damage multiplier. Then we'll use Silver Wolf's ultimate and talent to decrease the enemy's defense, and Silver Wolf's skill to decrease the enemy's resistance. Finally, Silver Wolf has her signature light cone, which increases the vulnerability multiplier. Sampo is next, and he has the Sweaty Light Cone for more defense shred, and his ultimate, which increases vulnerability to dot damage. And lastly, we have Ting Yun, whose ultimate provides a lot of bonus damage, and her skill provides a lot of attack. And we're going to break the enemy as well. Let's see how big of a damage increase we'll get from all these changes. We went from 9,260 damage to 41,300 damage, which is 4.46 times the original damage. This is an incredible increase, touching upon every multiplier that affects dots. So now that we understand what affects character dot damage, let's take a look at all the sources of character dot damage. Hopefully I didn't miss any, but this is all the sources of character dot damage that I could find. If I missed any, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Unsurprisingly, Kafka's, Luca's, and Sampo's dots have by far the largest multipliers. I've also included the light cones that cause dots in here as well, with Kafka's signature light cone being the most noteworthy, as it's basically just a bonus one-turn lightning dot on the enemy. Finally, Serval is worth mentioning because her dot multiplier is larger than most, and she can extend the duration of shock by 2 turns, which can help your rotations out significantly. I definitely expect miHoYo to add more dot-focused characters in the future, and of different elements and effects. Alright, so we've gone through character-specific dots. It's time to talk about break-related dots. When you break an enemy, a debuff is applied to the enemy based on the element that did the breaking. Break dots are similar to transformative reactions in Genshin Impact, in that it scales primarily off character level and the break effect stat. Break effect being similar to Genshin Impact's elemental mastery stat. Another really important thing to note is that Ice and Quantum's follow-up damage is not considered dot damage. This means that Kafka's ability to activate dots on the enemy will not activate Quantum's entanglement damage or Freeze's small little unfreezing damage. Imaginary, of course, doesn't do any follow-up damage. So this leaves us with 4 actual types of dot damage. We have Lightning's shock damage, Fire's burn, Physical's bleed, and Wind's wind shear. Also worth noting is that the break dot does not scale with the bonus damage multiplier, and it also does not scale with crit. So this leaves us with the following multipliers: base break damage, defense, vulnerability, resistance, and toughness. Knowing all this, which of these dots should we care about? Well, bleed deals the most damage, especially to enemies with high toughness gauges and with a lot of HP. Bleed is unique in this regard as it has these additional variables to consider. Burn is surprisingly also a pretty weak dot, and shock is a consistent medium powered dot. Wind shear is also unique in that versus normal enemies only 1 stack of wind shear is applied on break, while 3 stacks is applied against an elite enemy. With 3 stacks, wind shear becomes quite a formidable dot. And let's say we add roughly 220% break effect, which is achievable through stacking a ton of break effect. Now these numbers are looking much more impressive. So yeah, hopefully this gave you a better understanding of dot damage and maximizing your dot damage output. Dot damage is a wonderful mechanic that is relatively free to play friendly, since it doesn't scale with the very elusive crit stats. Kafka being able to activate every dot on the enemy means that she's a powerhouse for extracting the most value possible out of your, well, let's be real right now, Sampo and Luca, and hopefully some more characters in the future. Although honestly, my personal preferred way of playing Kafka is to actually just simply focus on increasing her personal damage output with supports like Silverwolf, Tingyuan, and Asta, as these characters will really jack up all the other multipliers for Kafka to do a ton of damage with. Either way though, whether you stack a lot more dots with characters like Sampo, Luca, and Kafka, or you go for a lot more buffs with supports like Silverwolf, Tingyuan, and Asta, hopefully now you have the tools in your arsenal to extract the most value out of your Kafka. Let me know if I missed anything in this guide video about dots down in the comments below. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.